Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I am one of your hosts, John Macri, fantasy analyst here at PFF. And as always, I am joined by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, the one and only Nathan Jahnke. Nate, nice seeing you on a Monday. Did you have a good weekend?
Yep, my weekend was fine. I was grinding through fantasy articles left and right all weekend long, basically, but glad we have 2 episodes a week now rather than just the one. And I'll be on vacation for part of the week, so we'll have to substitute me out for part of the 2 episodes this week, but we at least have me for this episode.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's nice to know, like, you know, when we move to 2 episodes per week, that means we're just getting closer to the fantasy season, which is a good thing. This is what we're building up to all year, obviously. So pretty exciting stuff. And as we get closer to the season, more news becomes breaking and relevant. And obviously we had some news over the weekend as well with DeAndre Hopkins signing with the Tennessee Titans on a 2-year, $26 million deal, potentially worth up to $32 million in incentives as well. Nate, what are your initial thoughts on Hopkins finally signing with the Titans for fantasy purposes this season? And maybe the bigger question is, how does this affect some of our favorite Titans pass catchers like Chig and Burks and Kyle Phillips as well?
Sure. So Hopkins, I think this will probably be his worst fantasy season in a little while. A few just glaring things. His PFF grade has been on the decline the last couple of seasons. His new quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, also had his PFF grade decline these past few seasons. Both of them are well past the age where you expect a decline. So I wouldn't be surprised if that keeps happening for both players. And then we're also seeing him go from one of the top 5 passing offenses in the league in terms of how often they pass versus run to one of the 5 most run heavy offenses in the NFL. So all of that's kind of working against him. Like, the one bright point that people are bringing up is his potential target share in the offense. With Tennessee, basically their top 3 other receivers are going to be all people from the 2022 draft class, none of which had a ton of production last year. We've seen players do well in the limited samples they had, but no one really had a full season's worth of good play. And so he's in the past had 25% target share, at least the most recent season with Arizona. Going back, we've seen A.J. Brown at his peak in that offense. It was 25% when Corey Davis was still on the team. Then once Corey Davis left, it did jump up to 29%. So we could see Hopkins get to that 29% range if things are going well for him. But I'm also not entirely convinced he'll be the best wide receiver in the offense with the direction Treylon Burks is going compared to the direction DeAndre Hopkins is going. So I could see it being a little more mixed between targets between the two of them. So all in all, I still think he's probably a top 30 fantasy wide receiver since he's still talented. He's a future Hall of Famer, arguably the best fantasy receiver in the past decade. But I think it'll be a decline from what we've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair. And you mentioned, a higher target rate if he does lead the team in targets as well. That'll be key to his success, obviously. And the only thing is that might be different is obviously the Titans. They've been a bottom 5 team in pass rate every year under Mike Vrabel as well. So that's since 2018. So not exactly the most ideal situation for fantasy purposes for a wide receiver, especially coming over from like Arizona, who was 4th in pass rate last season as well, right? So like you mentioned, could be his worst fantasy season in a while here. We did see A.J. Brown have some success there in the kind of wide receiver 2 range. But yeah, I don't think most people are really expecting like a wide receiver 1 season out of DeAndre Hopkins in Tennessee. Anyways, I think, that top 30, top 24 range, like you mentioned, is still very possible. But yeah, maybe a bit more concerned about some of the other Titans pass catchers. Like we said, we talked about Kyle Phillips a couple episodes ago, and Chig Okonkwo as well is another one that we both like. I think, their chances are still decent to be fantasy relevant, but there's slightly less targets now to potentially go their way with DeAndre Hopkins in the mix, which obviously wasn't the case before. So I think just as far as maintaining like a consistent fantasy floor, we might see those guys lose out a little bit, but not impossible for them to emerge still as fantasy relevant options on a weekly basis. But
Yeah, I messed with my rankings this past week, edited like 10 different articles yesterday to account for all this. But the main thing for me was mostly moving Traylon Burks down a little bit.
Yeah.
None of these guys that we care about for fantasy are really going to be losing much playing time to Hopkins. It's just losing targets. And Burks, we were drafting him because he's a high upside young player who was a first round pick. That's still the case. It just he might not see as many targets, or the potential to see a ton of targets isn't there as much as it was before. But you're not drafting him to be a fantasy starter to begin with. You're drafting him for his upside potential, and he still has that upside potential. So I didn't end up moving him down all that much because of the reasons that we're drafting him. And similarly, Kyle Phillips was already a deep sleeper. He plays in the slot. Hopkins plays out wide over 80% of the time. So no problem with having Hopkins out wide and Phillips in the slot still. And similarly, Chigoziem Okonkwo, I think he'll still do just fine and see plenty of targets. His concern's more playing time more so than target share.
Definitely. Love it. All right. So that is DeAndre Hopkins with the Tennessee Titans. But for this episode, we're talking draft strategy. So what we're going to do is we're going to go round by round through a fantasy draft using the early 1 to 3 overall picks, snake draft style. So this will be for one QB league, starting 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex. Basically, we'll walk through some of our thought process and strategy as to how we typically think through our picks and who our favorite targets are in each round, picking from either the 101, 102, or 103 holes. Hopefully, we'll give some ideas on how to approach your drafts this year and dominate your fantasy league as well. But before we do that, I do want to mention that this episode is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, Fabric by Gerber Life. As a parent, your top priority is always your children's well-being. You want to give them everything they need to grow and thrive, both now and in the future. With term life insurance from Fabric by Gerber Life, help protect your family so their future is secure no matter what happens. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy quickly, often in less than 10 minutes. Life insurance can have a bad rap for being complicated, but Fabric makes it easy to apply with its seamless digital experience. It's all online and on your time. And if you need the extra support, you can access a team of licensed agents who answer questions along the way. Take steps to help protect your family today with Fabric by Gerber Life. Take the 60-second quiz to find out if term life insurance is right for you, and apply today in just 10 minutes at meetfabric.com/PFF. That's meetfabric.com/PFF. MEET fabric.com/PFF. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company and distributed by Gerber Life Agency LLC using Fabric Technologies. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. For more information, visit us at meetfabric.com/PFF. Okay, let's get it going here. Again, assuming you have one of the first 3 picks in your draft, we'll highlight our top targets and pivot options as well. So let's jump into it here. Nate, what are you looking to do here starting off your drafts?
So round 1, you have one of the first 3 picks, and I am leaning running back when you're in a 12-team league. A lot of this has to do with how your team will end up getting made up. When there's 24 starting running backs in your league at least, and 36 wide receivers, it's a lot easier to find that depth at wide receiver than it is at running back, just with how you look at the tiers at running back compared to the tiers at wide receiver and what makes the difference between those tiers. Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler, I think pretty well unanimously the top 2 running backs in most league formats. They've fairly consistently been among the top 2, at least in fantasy points per game these recent seasons. It's because they have both the volume and the production in both the run game and the pass game. And it's really hard to find a running back who does all of those things well in an offense that lets them do all of those things well. You go even to running backs that'll get picked later in the first round, early in the second round, and they're typically either really good at rushing or really good at receiving or good at both of those things, but not great at them and getting a lot of volume. These are the 2 that have everything out of a running back, and you're not going to be able to replace that production. I know wide receiver is the other position that you're considering here. I think it's slightly too early for Travis Kelce, definitely too early for a quarterback in a 1 quarterback league. So it's only really between running back and wide receiver. I know you can't replace the top end wide receiver production either, but you can definitely get a lot closer because these are players that basically all 36 of them are seeing significant amount of playing time, seeing a decent amount of targets. The only thing that's really separating them is the quality of the receiver and the quality of the offense and how often they're passing the ball. And you can find, even with the top 4 wide receivers, there's at least some flaw in what you're hoping for the ideal wide receiver. So I know injury is definitely a concern with running backs in general. That's leading teams to kind of stay a little more away from running backs. But if you have your first round pick injured anyway, you're probably not going to be in good shape. And I am trying to win my league, not just have a good team in my league. So I'm willing to take a little bit more risk of injury, knowing that if the running back doesn't get injured, then you're probably going to be at a decent advantage compared to the other teams in the league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's hard to argue, right? Going running back first. I wanted to kind of have like a different approach here as well. And honestly, it's not so much about going against running back as much as it is going for this one specific player. And that's kind of why I'm leaning Justin Jefferson with the first overall pick. And I should note, like for me, I've always kind of been more like relying on like sticking with my rankings and filling out the roster positions as needed. Obviously, paying attention to bye weeks and stuff like that as well. But that's kind of where I found like the most successful rosters have come from for me, is when I don't stray too far away from, what from those rankings and kind of what the board is giving me versus, having like a set strategy, like a zero running back or a hero running back or all those other fun names that you heard out there. Because every draft is different. 90% of the time, things aren't going to go as planned anyways. Obviously, with these early picks, we get to kind of steer the ship in the direction that we want. So I think it makes sense to go running back there. But I do like Justin Jefferson a ton this year. It's really close for me. I don't know that there's like a clear number one overall pick this season. And I think, you can't really go wrong between Christian McCaffrey or Justin Jefferson, whichever one you want to do. But, for the most part in PPR leagues, I do tend to lean Jefferson. Just such a high floor, high ceiling type player. I mean, 9 top 5 finishes last season in PPR leagues, the most at his position, which was including 3 weeks as the number 1 fantasy wide receiver overall, averaged 21.5 PPR points per game across 17 games played last season. He has the stability at quarterback. He's the clear number 1 target in the passing game every week, elite playmaking ability. And heading into year 4 only in his career, he's never posted fewer than 1,400 receiving yards and arguably could even have potential for more receiving touchdowns after landing just 8 last year with only 1 multi-touchdown game. So that's kind of what it came back to me. And, something I was kind of like thinking of just as far as like a tiebreaker kind of thing, and maybe getting a little bit too galaxy brained here. But, one thing I did notice for the 49ers last season during that kind of crucial stretch of the season is when they were kind of blowing teams out. And this is including in the playoffs, CMC wasn't as involved in the passing game. You look at weeks 14, 16, and 18, as well as the wild card round. They won all those games by at least 17 points. And CMC averaged 3 or fewer targets per game in those games, where he was averaging closer to 5 in every other game. So the reason that I think about this is, we rank the 49ers as having the 7th easiest schedule this season, while also coming in as 3rd in our power rankings. So we could maybe see some of those blowouts and negative game scripts for McCaffrey's usage as well. So that just ended up being like a slight tiebreaker for me to lean Justin Jefferson here. But I mean, at 101, 102, 103, any of these 3 guys, really, it's hard to argue. And I'd be happy with any of them, really.
Fair. And I'll note, we're basing this off, or at least I'm basing what I'm saying off of the article that I write. I have a series where I do this for both a general strategy, regardless of your pick number, as well as breaking it down by pick. I recently started a 10 team as well, something that I didn't do last year, but I am doing this year. And once I broke it down for a 10 team league, it was making more sense to pick a wide receiver early on, because there are fewer starting running backs in the fantasy league in general. So it's a lot easier to be able to get 2 running backs that you're happy with. So that pushed Jefferson over the edge a little bit for me there. So a lot of it just depends also on how many people are in your league, how many people you're starting in your league. A lot of this is not just looking who's the best player right now, but looking, okay, who's going to be available with my next pick, who's going to be available the round after that, and figuring out what combination is going to get you the best football team, which is why we're looking at this in terms of strategy rather than just here's the rankings, pick the top guy on the list.
Yep, that's fair for sure. Yeah, and this is, kind of looking at how my plan kind of worked out when I'm approaching these drafts. This is where I already start to kind of sweat my picks a little bit going into the second round, right? Because I'm hoping to get that RB1 now. And yeah, I guess I'll lead into it here since I kind of started rambling about it already. But yeah, I went. I'm really hoping for Tony Pollard in this spot in round 2 at picks 22 to 24. I also put Josh Jacobs there and Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen as potential pivots in that area. But like I said, already kind of starting to sweat because it's right around his ADP. I did write him up last week as a player to target at his current ADP of RB9 because I have him as RB5. I do think that he has that potential in him this season. As the lead back in Dallas, we're all kind of aware of how good he's been playing behind Zeke for most of his career. But now with Zeke gone, obviously, I think the sky's the limit. There are concerns about, maybe his ability to withstand an RB1 workload for an entire season. But a lot of the data that I've pulled on that, ranging from historical running backs who saw a similar workload increase, and even for Pollard himself, when he's gotten more carry, shows that it isn't much of a concern. Really, the main thing being that just the overall volume increase, even if he does have lower efficiency, the larger that workload is all that really matters anyways. So if he's getting, 250 to 300 carries, 70-ish targets, plus, the majority of Zeke's goal line carries, I really believe he has, overall RB1 potential in a very good offense behind a good offensive line. So if I can get Pollard as my RB1, then I'm happy with that. And it makes me feel a little bit better about passing on running back with my first overall pick. If not, Josh Jacobs is also another potential pick here for me. And if they both happen to be gone, then that's my kind of reason to go top tier quarterback at this spot, whether it's Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts. Usually Patrick Mahomes is gone by this point. So I'm still a Hurts guy, as we kind of talked about way back on our quarterbacks rankings episode, but I'm happy with either guy here. It's hard to find, bad options in the first 2 rounds. So yeah, how about you? What are you looking at here in the second round?
There, I'm leaning quarterback here at the end of the second round. Part of it is it's going to be harder to get a top tier quarterback this year compared to past years. In recent seasons, it was pretty easy to list off 12 quarterbacks that you could be happy with on your fantasy team. And you could know that probably 2 of them would get injured. There'd be 2 sleepers that end up there, and that would just be the top 12 quarterbacks that year in some kind of order. So it was made more sense to wait at quarterback because you'd be able to get one of those players. But it's going to be a lot harder this year. Especially with you've had Tom Brady retire, you've had a number of older quarterbacks who have taken a step back who were fantasy starters in recent seasons. Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, Ryan Tannehill, all quarterbacks who in the past year or 2 were in that top 10, top 12 range, all have taken steps back recently, and they're all in their mid 30s or older. So it's harder to think that they're going to step up. And yeah, we've definitely seen some quarterbacks improve in that time, but not enough to make up for it. So there's typically about 8 quarterbacks that I'm really comfortable taking to be my fantasy starter this year. And if you don't take a quarterback, either this pick or the next pick, a lot of them will be gone by the time it's your pick again in the 4th round. So I want to secure a quarterback while I can. And I'd rather get one at the end of round 2 rather than the start of round 3, because it's a lot easier for one of those players to get sniped and you're not able to get a comparable replacement compared to a wide receiver or tight end where there should be someone at a comparable value with the next pick. And Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and like you mentioned, Mahomes is probably gone at this point, but he's definitely in that conversation if he's still available at this point. All 3 of them definitely stand out among the rest of the quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts for his rushing, Patrick Mahomes for his passing, Josh Allen having both of them not quite as good as the top quarterback, but has a better balance than either of the other quarterbacks. All of them are scoring a couple more fantasy points per game compared to the rest of the quarterbacks over these past few seasons. And they're just compared to running back, and mostly running back, a little bit wide receiver as well. We see more consistency from one year to the next of here are the top guys. They're probably going to be the top guys next year as long as they stay healthy. So I can be pretty confident that Allen, Hurts, and Mahomes should be top 5 in fantasy points per game at least, and fantasy points in general if they stay healthy. So I lean towards a quarterback with one of these picks because they give you that value, even though they weren't giving you quite that value in past years because you could find a replacement, but now it's harder to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess for me, since I'm like most likely missing out on one of these top three quarterbacks, just based on kind of how I started it, I'm a little bit more comfortable waiting a couple more rounds at the position. I have a little bit more faith in some of the guys that could potentially step up this year and outperform their ADP. There will be one specifically that I'll talk about in a little bit, but not to give it away. I end up waiting a little bit at quarterback here, so we'll go on to round 3 here. So this will be picks 25 and 27. So pretty close from after we've taken our second pick. Do you have a preferred target here in the third round?
Yeah, I'm fine with either taking a tight end or wide receiver here. I found with writing these articles, a lot of the time I'm saying get a tight end or wide receiver in round 3. Whatever you don't do in round 3, do it in round 6. Because similar to quarterback at tight end, there's only about 7 or so players that I'm confident in picking. Travis Kelce, obviously tight end 1, but the first 3 picks are a little too early for him, and then you're not going to get him in round 2. So there's kind of one cluster of tight ends that you can get in round 3, another cluster that you can get around round 6. So I'm fine with aiming for either one of those. I lean a little bit towards tight end just because sometimes, even though we see ADP the way it is, you'll see a team take a tight end and then other teams will start to panic a little bit and then also pick their tight end. So you can see all of them go either higher or lower than ADP. So I lean to get the tight ends now because you're not going to be able to find a replacement, where wide receiver, it's a little bit easier to find someone who's ranked a little bit lower and at a comparable value. So Mark Andrews is the guy that I note the most here with Baltimore. Grade wise, he's basically been close to as good as Travis Kelce on per play basis and a number of metrics in recent seasons. It just, the Kansas City Chiefs have been arguably the most pass happy team in recent leagues, and Kelce rarely leaves the field in those situations. So Kelce just has the volume that dominates everyone else, where Andrews has the talent. He's just been in Baltimore's run first offense where the volume hasn't been nearly as high. Baltimore is expected to pass the ball a bit more this year. That might hurt his target share a little bit because Baltimore has also invested a lot in wide receivers recently. But with Andrew's talent, I still expect him to be excellent this season. So he's been near the top every year of his career, basically. He should still be there this year. So definitely happy to get him and confident that he'll do well as long as he can stay healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I guess for me, so I end up going wide receiver here, and I'm with you in that there's that cluster as that's available. It's in round 6 as well for the tight end. So usually I end up kind of waiting on there, and I'll talk about my guy when we get there as well. So what I like to do here, knowing that I'm probably going to target tight end in that 6th-ish round, is I like to kind of start off my like run of the tier 3 wide receivers. So T Higgins or Devontae Smith or Chris Olave, those are the 3 guys that I kind of like there. And Higgins and Smith being like the 2 top clear choices for me, because what I want to kind of do here in these earlier rounds is I want to target receivers in kind of high powered offenses that could score a lot of points this season. That's kind of the main thing for me. I want to try to target good offenses to get the most bang for my buck. And Higgins being my favorite, Devontae Smith a close second. Chris Olave is definitely one I'll have my eye on as well. So good with going wide receiver here. And any of these guys, I would be thrilled. But obviously hoping that I'll still be able to snag, one of those tight ends that I have in that kind of second tier in a few more rounds, as opposed to starting it right here. But that's kind of where I'm going.
Fair enough.
All right.
So I guess that moves us on to round 4.
Yeah. We'll go on to round 4. But before we do that, actually, we do have another sponsor we'd like to shout out, and that is DraftKings. So this season, DraftKings has launched the largest best ball tournament in DraftKings history. Right now, you can enter into DraftKings best ball tournament for a shot at over $10 million in guaranteed cash prizes. Make your entry into the draft today. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the NFL season without having to worry about managing your roster, waiver waiver wires, and more. To start playing best ball, download the DraftKings app using code PFF, enter DraftKings Best Ball Millionaire Contest, and snake draft your team for the season. Each week, you'll automatically rack up points from all your top scorers, no ads, drops, trades, or I should have played him insteads. Teams with the most points by the end of the season will have a shot to take home the $1 million top prize. So what are you waiting for? Head to the DraftKings app and sign up with the code PFF and start playing the best ball today. Join the DraftKings $10 million best ball tournament only on DraftKings with code PFF. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, one per customer, opt-in required with $10 entry fee. Bonus issued at $10 DraftKings dollars. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com/promotions for details. All right, let's go into round 4 here. So what are we looking at here? Round 4. So we're looking at picks 46 to 48. Where are you going with your pick in this range?
I'm definitely going wide receiver here, especially after I went running back, quarterback, tight end, but also in the 4th round in general. Just a lot of wide receivers have an ADP in this range for a good reason. It's a lot of guys who are either the number 1 wide receiver on their team or the number 2 wide receiver on a good team where they're all still proven and pretty close to the number 1 guy anyway. Terry McLaurin's my top target here, the top wide receiver in Washington, but also guys like Mike Williams, Chris Godwin, DJ Moore, all wide receivers that we expect to be productive since we're at a point in the draft where like the top quarterbacks are gone, the top tight ends are gone. There's a decent sized drop off. Even at running back, a lot of the good ones are gone at this point. There's a chance you'll be able to get someone who's may have fallen a little bit, but really you are moving from the running backs who are clear number 1 running backs on their team, 3 down backs who will see plenty of volume and have at least some talent, to a range where it's guys who are either talented but in a committee, or they should have a full-time role but a bit less proven. So there's a chance or a higher chance something could go wrong compared to the guys ahead of them. So wide receivers, these are players that are starters, are going to see plenty of targets, they'll see production. It just, they aren't quite as talented as some of the guys that are being drafted earlier. So Terry McLaurin, like I mentioned, he's just fairly consistent top 30 fantasy wide receiver each year of his career. New offensive coordinator this year, so a chance that he might see even more production this year, especially if they start being a little bit more pass happy than they have in past seasons.
Nice. Yeah, I like Terry McLaurin. This was like a mixed round for me. This is basically kind of how things fall depending on where we're at in the draft. But one of the players that I've noticed that does come here is Aaron Jones. So I pair him up with Tony Pollard. So he'll be my RB2. There's other players that I'm looking at, including Justin Fields, Christian Watson, and any of those wide receivers like you mentioned. But this is definitely where things get a little bit trickier as we get into those kind of, 3rd and 4th tier options, like you said. However, I do like Aaron Jones in this range as kind of my ideal pick. He's been a really efficient runner. He's great upside as a receiver in an offense that I think should continue to lean on him. If I'm getting him as my RB2 in this spot, I'm fairly happy. Even though AJ Dillon, being there is a bit of an issue, he should continue to kind of eat into touches a little bit. But I still like Jones a lot in the receiving game and in PPR in the 4th round, especially with somebody like Joe Mixon no longer really going in this range, thanks to him kind of taking a pay cut last week as well. Jones, I think, might be the best kind of PPR option kind of remaining in this range, who could also lead his team in carries as well. So that was kind of my thought process on this one. But I'd also consider, like you said, any of the wide receivers, Christian Watson, if Jones is gone, potentially getting, a team's wide receiver 1 as my wide receiver 3 in this case. And then my other main option, since I don't have a quarterback yet, would be Justin Fields, who I could talk about a little bit later as well.
There. And mentioning Jones, I've had a series of articles where I do player profiles, go through the players that have been talked about a bit recently, and Jones was one of them. And the more I researched him, the more I started to get a little concerned, just because there's so many things that could go wrong with him this year. A lot of his production, especially as a receiver, has come in the form of touchdowns. And without Aaron Rodgers, I just don't expect them to be scoring as much this year. So I could see his touchdowns going down. And that's been a pretty consistent thing for him throughout his career. And then just simply, he's getting up there in age. He's one of the running backs who's had the most touches over the course of his career. That's still a starter. And A.J. Dillon has graded very well over the course of his career. I know he had a little bit of setbacks last season, but in general, you have a younger running back who's nearing the peak of his career and an older running back who's nearing the end of it. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Dillon see a little bit more playing time than he has in the past, and Jones a little bit less. So I could see a couple of things going wrong for Jones this year, and not too much reason to suspect he could have a better season than what we've seen in recent years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. I think it's a good point to kind of bring up too. And it all depends on kind of how that offense looks, right? And how Jordan Love does as a starter, and, whether they rely more on Jones as a runner, or, Love builds a connection with him and feels comfortable kind of going to Jones in the passing game. It's a big question mark, right? So I definitely understand the hesitance there for Aaron Jones this season. All right, let's go into round 5 here. So these will be picks 49 to 51 range. I mentioned them earlier. This is kind of where I'd like to grab my QB1 with Justin Fields, if he's still around. Obviously, some of the best rushing upside at the quarterback position. And I think if he can develop as a passer, getting some help from DJ Moore coming in, we could be looking at potentially an overall QB1 season from him this year. This is, he's one of the main reasons I feel a little bit more comfortable waiting on quarterback, or missing out on the Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts type in the earlier rounds, because I have a little bit of faith in Justin Fields kind of taking that next step this year. And obviously that'll lead to more fantasy success as well. He was significant, as a fantasy producer and as a rusher last year. If he can, at least come up with some of that, as well as more of a passing, being more of a passing threat, I think we could see him take that next step as well. It definitely gets much riskier here to try to get, maybe another tier 2 quarterback beyond this point. I think, 20 picks from now. So this is where I really want to attack that quarterback spot here. Otherwise, yeah, it's looking at other wide receiver picks, guys like, again, Christian Watson, Drake London, any of the guys that you mentioned. But yeah, how about you?
Fair. I'm fine with the Fields idea here. Like, his rushing at the end of the last season was so insane of what he was able to do. He has 3 of the best rushing games in terms of rushing yards by a quarterback of all time. 3 of the top 13, I think it is. And he did that in the last 7 games he played in. So just seeing like some of the best quarterbacks of all times in terms of rushing, and they have like 1 game in that range, and Fields did it multiple times over a short period of time. So amazing what he was able to do. I hope that he's able to increase his accuracy a bit. There are quarterbacks I tried to look recently, since I had the DJ Moore article go up last week. I have Cole Kmet going up later this week. So I've been doing a bit of Fields research because of that. And there are quarterbacks who make a big jump in accuracy from one year to another when they're still younger. So I think it's at least possible for Fields to get there. It's just a lot more of a gamble compared to the quarterbacks that you're picking a couple rounds earlier, where Fields, maybe he doesn't have those insane rushing performances and doesn't get all that more accurate, in which case this is probably too big of a reach for him. But Fields, like you said, has that quarterback 1 overall upside, because if he's rushing at a more insane rate than any other quarterback, that's huge for his fantasy value. Mm-hmm. But since I already picked a quarterback, I am leaning for another wide receiver at this point. Similarly, since I waited at wide receiver, picked more players at other positions earlier, and with this being kind of the turn of the draft, a lot of the wide receivers that were available before, there's bound to be at least a couple that slip through the cracks at this point. So basically take whichever wide receiver is available that's at the top of the list, since there's definitely going to be some variation from ADP. Mike Williams is the guy that I noted in my article. I'm excited for him, especially with Kellen Moore's offense and the Cowboys attacking the downfield more often than the Chargers were last season. The Chargers, one of the lowest average depths of target, and Mike Williams is a wide receiver on the team that's more of a big big play threat. So I could see Williams having a big year, even though the Chargers have a ton of weapons in that offense. So this is the kind of range where you're getting wide receivers who you can definitely trust to just put in your starting lineup each week. Don't have to think about it too much in terms of matchups and just run with it. So happy to add another wide receiver at this point.
Nice. Yeah. And I think Williams is a good one in that range too, because I think a lot of the times he'll kind of fall to that area. I think people are concerned about the injury risk and things like that. So he kind of has this negative connotation attached to him, but you're right. I mean, in that offense this year, if he's healthy, he could be an absolute value in that spot and be a huge part of the offense and pay dividends there. So really like the Mike Williams pick in the 5th. Let's go to the 6th round now. So pick 70 to 72. Did you have a specific target within this range?
Sure. I'm once again going wide receiver. As I mentioned in round 3, and I know you agree with as well, it's a good range to get a tight end or a wide receiver. Whatever you don't do in round 3, you do in round 6. So since I went with Mark Andrews in round 3, going wide receiver yet again in round 6, Michael Pittman is a guy here that I like in the range just because he should be the top wide receiver in Indianapolis. I know it's a little bit of a gamble of what will happen in the offense with Anthony Richardson as the new quarterback, new coach and everything there as well, but he's just the best wide receiver option on the team, best receiving option in general, looking at their tight ends and running back as well. So I think Pittman should see plenty of volume again this year. He took a little bit of a step back in terms of his PFF grade last season. Hopefully that rebounds, but even if that doesn't rebound, he'll still have plenty of volume. And later in the draft, you're drafting a lot of wide receivers with high upside that you're kind of hoping can do better than what Pittman's doing. But if they don't end up doing better, then you at least have a player like Pittman in your lineup who you can start each week and maybe not see the greatest production, but Pittman's still a relatively young wide receiver. There's a chance this offense clicks a lot in year 1, in which case he could have a huge season as well. So happy to get Pittman here, but this is also the range where happy to get a tight end and definitely would be trying to get a tight end if I haven't picked one yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of where I go with it. I go tight end here. We mentioned kind of, waiting on it a little bit to get that next group of tight ends. And I have Dallas Goedert as being pretty close to the previous guys that are going in some of the earlier rounds as well. So he's been really my most commonly picked tight end I found this offseason for sure. I think by a long shot. I usually wait at tight end for the most part. If I'm not getting Kelsey, I like Goddard quite a bit as kind of a value pick among the tight ends that, again, I have all in that same kind of tier. Him going much later really helps me scoop him up quite a bit in drafts. I mean, he's just been, elite after the catch, great pass catcher, explosive playmaker, had one of the better explosive play rates for the position last year at 40%. He's an elite separator as well, gets open on 70% of his targets and was averaging about 6 targets per game in a great offense for potential scoring and volume. So, if Goddard is gone and there aren't any more of kind of my tier 2 tight end options available, then I might have to punt tight end to tier 3. So it does get riskier, which is in a few rounds. So then I'm either looking at wide receiver, like you mentioned, either a Brandon Ayuk or potentially like a running back Cam Akers, somebody like that. But, yeah, I do mention Cam Akers a little bit later on as we go into round 7 here as well. So let's go into round 7.
Sure. So round 7, that's my time to get another running back. James Conner is the guy that I have targeted here. It's a fine time to get a running back that's relatively safe in that there are going to be an every down player. It's not the best offense in the world, but it's someone that that you can put in your starting lineup. He's been great in terms of scoring touchdowns in the past. He's been one of the best players at just scoring fantasy points in general. 16.4 fantasy points per game, ranked 7th most out of 94 backs in the last 2 seasons. So, and Arizona really didn't bring in any competition for him whatsoever. So we know Connor's going to see plenty of volume. He probably doesn't have the upside to be a top 5 running back unless Arizona's offense starts doing really well this year. But if that does happen, then Connor does have a shot at the top 10. It's just not something that a lot of us are expecting. But I think this is just the perfect round to get a safe running back because, in the later rounds, you're going to be getting high upside guys that aren't likely to hit, but if they do hit, they'll hit big, where if you can mix that with a running back who's relatively safe, that you can put in the starting lineup and wait to see which other running backs develop, it's important to have that kind of player. So that's the kind of guy that I'm trying to pick here.
Yeah, I'm with you. I got James Conner as a potential target for me as well. I put Cam Akers. I mean, since I'm picking again here, like I mentioned in the last round, it's fairly close to where I was picking before, and I was considering Akers there, but obviously took Goddard. I know people hate Cam Akers, so I'm just not going to let him fall any further, and I'll add him to the running back stable here as kind of my RB3, and he'll spend a lot of time in my weekly flex as long as he stays healthy, I'd imagine. James Conner, another one, again, just like solid weekly production that we should get out of these guys, consistent RB1 usage on their own teams, and that should deliver a nice fantasy floor with a potential for some high big blow up games as well. I also like Brandon Ayuk in this range. He's one of my favorite targets here as well. If I don't go running back, I just think is worth mentioning because he's one of my favorite targets from the 49ers receiving core at cost. But I think, the main thing for me through these first kind of 7 rounds is attacking stability and hopefully limiting the question mark players. And that includes Akers. I know, he's got the injury concerns, but I do see him as a safe, kind of steady starting running back option to kind of round out those first 7 rounds for me. And that allows me to potentially take some swings here in the later rounds of the draft.
I think that's fair. I think I have Akers right above Connor in my rankings and just probably being slightly conservative when I write these articles, just because I want someone to be able to, if they don't know all that much about fantasy football, they can just have this open while they're drafting. And I don't want them to run into a case where all the players that I'm suggesting are taken and then they don't know what to do. So I'm guessing anyone listening to this probably isn't going to have that problem and will know how to adjust in those situations, but trying to have this article open for anyone to be able to use. So I would definitely be happy to take Akers at this point as well.
Nice. I like it. All right, let's before we start getting into those rounds where we can start taking some swings, let's do one more ad read for today, and this one is from our friends at Manscaped. If you haven't heard already, it's Smooth Sack Summer. When you're playing in the summer sun, make sure you're scaped from pubes to bum. That's right, this is the summer to keep your balls cool while still looking hot with Manscaped. The leaders in below-the-waist grooming are making sure we have a ball this summer by giving our pants partners everything they need to stay fresh. Dive headfirst into Smooth Sack Summer by going to manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with our code PFF. The Manscaped Performance Package 4.0 has everything you need to prepare that summer bod. They have built the ultimate grooming bundle for your summer grooming. Their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to their advanced skin-safe technology. The Lawnmower 4.0 has a 7,000 RPM motor, a new multifunction on-off switch, can engage a travel lock, and gives you the ability to turn the 4000K LED spotlight on and off when needed for a more precise shave. Did I mention this trimmer is waterproof too? Beach, lake, or shower, this razor will devour even the strongest pubes. Manscaped even threw in 2 free gifts to their Performance Package 4.0, the Manscaped Boxers and the Shed Travel Bag. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code PFF at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code PFF at manscaped.com. It's Smooth Sack Summer, boys. Get on board or get left behind. All right. Round 8. So we're looking at picks 94 to 96, getting into the later rounds here. Where are you going in round 8, Nate?
I'm going wide receiver again here. We're getting to the point where we're starting to get either the flex players or some of the top backups, and something that I especially like about getting the quarterback and tight end early is I probably don't need to worry too much about getting a backup. Whoever is available on the waiver wire probably isn't all that much different from the players that I'd be drafting at the end of the draft. So I can just kind of stockpile running backs and wide receivers. And we're at a point with running back where a lot of the players available are in committees, and there's a lot of players like that. So if I wait a round or two for running back, there should be decently similar quality later, where wide receivers, we're starting to get to the end of the players that we know will be starters and have high upside, and start getting to players that might be a little bit more questionable in terms of their playing time or those kind of things. So I like to get a wide receiver here to have another safe option Gabriel Davis is the one player that I have, especially now that I don't have to worry about any other wide receiver going to Buffalo. So I'm happy with Davis now being a starter that we can trust to remain in that starting lineup. But other guys that I have, Juju Smith-Schuster, Jacoby Myers, Quentin Johnston, Cortland Sutton, all guys who should see plenty of playing time, plenty of targets, and might not have the upside as some other wide receivers, but definitely have an opportunity to do really well. And Davis, especially someone who's a big gamble in that he's had huge games in his career and just hasn't been too consistent yet. So hopefully all he needs to do is add that consistency and then he'd be a fantasy starter.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a good call. I think this is a good way to do it. And I did do it a little bit different. For me, typically what I end up doing here, because I played it a little bit safer in those earlier rounds, with the Tony Pollards and the Justin Jeffersons and T Higgins of the world. This is where I really start to kind of take some swings. So I take my first kind of big swing here, usually with somebody like a Kadarius Toney. So I'm looking at Tony. Obviously, we're aware of all the red flags, but if he can stay healthy and avoid, I think, any of the off-field issues in that offense, he could be a big hit here. High end after the catch wide receiver, which was huge for Kansas City and Mahomes last season with no Tyreek Hill in the lineup. They really started to kind of rely on their yak production more than anything. So he could be a perfect weapon for Mahomes, but obviously comes with a lot of risk here. Some of the other guys that I like in this range too, someone with also a lot of risk is Michael Thomas, who was actually great last year when he was in the lineup, which was only 3 games. And we know he's missed a lot of time in recent years. So again, big risk there, but he was averaging 17 PPR points per game last year. He earned a 21% target rate on routes run. So really like those kinds of guys in here. I think I could start to take some of those bigger swings and hope that they pay off and fill my flex with some high-end value picks here.
Yeah, Tom is someone that I recently wrote a player profile with, and he's possibly the one where after I wrote the player profile, I was more high on than I was before starting the article. I was concerned, like the injury concerns are definitely still there, but I think I was a little bit more concerned about him now having Derek Carr as his quarterback, where he was a lot more used to having Drew Brees at quarterback. But I think Derek Carr and Thomas is a good combination together. And you can check out in the article why I think those two can be a good combination this season.
Nice. All right, let's go to round 9 now. So this is picks 97 to 99. Nate, what are you probably doing here in the 9th round?
That was when I start getting back to running back, and it'll be running back a bit. Some of these later picks as well. Now we're getting to some of the other running backs in committee. A number of them have been taken now, but there's still some of them definitely with high upside and a chance to be the number 1 guy, even if there's not an injury. Zach Charbonnet, who is number 1 of my options, Jamal Williams, Rashad Penny, all guys who definitely have that high upside. We've either seen it before or seen what they can do in college, and their teams have invested in them this offseason. They're in new situations, so that adds to the uncertainty to what can happen this year. So compared to some other running backs like Antonio Gibson, someone that I also note later, and Brian Robinson as other options, but those are guys where they have a new coach, but it's the same running backs that they're competing with. They might not see a huge role increase if there's an injury to their team, someone else in their team, where Jamal Williams, I could see him just simply leading the team in carries this season, even if Alvin Kamara doesn't face that big of a suspension. I think he's a better runner than Kamara at this point in his career, so he could be the leader in carries. Similarly with Penny, the big concern is injury. We've talked about him before. He could probably have a couple games where he's a top 5, top 10 fantasy running back. Other games where he might be missing games with injury, but I'd rather have someone that I can put in my starting lineup for a number of weeks and then no, I don't have to worry about him the other weeks, compared to someone who is a borderline fantasy starter the entire season.
Nice. Yeah, I like it. So this it's kind of similar players a little bit that, as what we talked about in the last round, since it's so close together with, for me, I, put Gabe Davis, Michael Thomas in here. I think a lot of the running backs that you mentioned as well makes sense. But the one name that kind of pops out to me here, somebody that I've seen even go around later than this, is Javonte Williams. So I think he's another one of those picks that comes with some risk, obviously, but could potentially pay off in a big way. I'm into Javonte Williams in this range range. And since I'm not picking again for like another 20-ish picks or so, I like to try to grab him here. Obviously coming off injury, no guarantee that he'll be healthy to start the season, or potentially, he might take some time to get back to his old self as well. But, if we do get him back to start the year, and as the optimism of Sean Payton and Williams himself would suggest, then, he'd be a steal in this range, I think. And as one of the best and most elusive running backs in the league, helping him kind of create those, bonus yardage per carry type stats, I think, with Denver being a potentially better offense as well this season, a better offensive line, Sean Payton's tendency to run the ball and kind of lean on one singular back for most of the carries. I really like Javonte Williams in this range as a potential, high upside running back that you're probably not going to get in rounds later than this. So obviously comes with the risk of, not getting back to his old self 1 year removed from a major injury, or getting back on the field at all in time for the start of the year, which is why he's going this late. But I do think by playing it a little safer on some of the earlier picks and taking some swings here in the later rounds, I could hope that one or two of them pay off.
Yeah, I'd also be happy with them there. I could very well see his ADP rising as we get closer and closer to the start of the season, unless we hear something about a setback. But everything so far seemed to be decently positive on him.
Nice. All right, let's go with round 10 here. So now we're picking in the 118 to 120 range. So we're in the triple digit areas of the draft. I'll start off. So Nate, for me, I mentioned taking Justin Fields in the 6th round. This is kind of where I'd like to try to target maybe a tight end too. I don't have it as safe, with a Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts as my QB1. So maybe I want to take some insurance at this point. And I'll go into this in a future article, but I believe Anthony Richardson is kind of like the late round quarterback to target this year, just as we fall into these double digit rounds, just as a super athletic mobile quarterback playing under Shane Steichen. He has a lot of question marks as a passer, obviously, which hopefully, doesn't keep him from playing this year, but the team does sound like they'll get him out there to start the year, which is obviously best case scenario to start. If Steichen leans into Richardson's strengths as a mobile threat and high percentage throws, that could be enough to get him to kind of deliver those high end fantasy performances similar to Justin Fields last season. I think he's far and away my top target to pair with Fields for if anything happens to Justin Fields. I'd hopefully still be getting that high end fantasy production from the position at a discounted price, but also keeping anyone else from getting him and being able to utilize them on a weekly basis as well, I think is important. So Anthony Richardson here, absolutely one of my favorite picks in round 10-ish. The other options, I like that could be close to as effective here are the guys like Daniel Jones and Geno Smith. I believe, they also have that rushing upside with obviously some risk as passers on whether they can maintain the momentum from last season or, not so ideally would be my QB2 in most cases.
That's fair. Like we're talking about picks 1 through 3 today, but in other articles, I go through other pick numbers where I'm not picking a quarterback in round 2. And this is the kind of range where I'm looking for a backup quarterback, since, as I mentioned, there are like 8 quarterbacks that I'm comfortable with and happy with to be my fantasy starter. Then there's another 7 or 8 quarterbacks who you can make an argument will be a top 12 quarterback this year. I think all 3 of them that you mentioned fit that scenario where you could argue that they should be in the top 12 of your rankings. So if I don't have a top quarterback that I'm happy with, I'm trying to get 2 of those quarterbacks, and this is the range to get the second one for sure. But since I picked a top 3 quarterback, I don't feel the need to pick a backup quarterback at this point. Fine going back and forth with more running backs and wide receivers. Perfect time to pick one of the wide receivers that I mentioned in my sleeper article. But for this, I will go with Rondale Moore with Arizona. With DeAndre Hopkins leaving, they also lost AJ Green, Robbie Chosen. So they definitely don't have the wide receiver depth that they once had. Moore has been fairly good when he's been healthy. I think the big problem last year is he just wasn't able to stay healthy. So one of definitely the best wide receivers after the catch, making guys miss after the tackle. Should be the primary slot receiver. We have a new coaching staff, so how they view the wide receivers could definitely be different than what we've seen before. But I think there's definitely a chance for Moore to be the second leader in targets for Arizona on a team that will need to be passing the ball a lot. And with his low average depth of target, a lot easier for a quarterback, regardless of who the quarterback is, to get him the ball compared to when you're looking at downfield throws where the quality of quarterback matters a lot more. So I think Moore can survive the fact that they might not have Kyler Murray for a while, and Colt McCoy also had been dealing with an injury. So I'm happy to get Moore and think he'll have plenty of volume this season.
Yeah. Clayton Tune's season is heating up, and I think he would like Rondale Moore as his wide receiver too in that offense. Yeah, definitely a good pick there. And yeah, you got some other good options in that range as well. Rashad Bateman, Zay Jones, Tyler Boyd, Darnell Mooney, DJ Chark, all really solid options at wide receiver still on the board there. So as we get into round 11, we both have a similar top target here in the draft. This is picks 121 to 123. I'm curious if it changes at all for you after the DeAndre Hopkins signing. But who was your top target in round 11?
Yeah, I have Chigoziem Okonkwo here. I did go through all of my articles that have already been out to account for all of the Tennessee changes, and Okonkwo did not move here. There were a bunch where I had Treylon Burks as one of the top options or one of the top options, and those typically ended up moving. And DeAndre Hopkins ended up being a top option in a number of places, but I assume his ADP is going to rise significantly after this move. So didn't want to put him there knowing that his ADP is just going to end up changing. But Okonkwo, definitely happy with him in round 11. Probably don't need a backup tight end after getting Mark Andrews. But despite that, when we have an opportunity to get a guy who should be a top 12 fantasy tight end, prevent someone else from getting a top 12 guy, and just someone that in these articles, I have plenty of graphics, and any graphic I try to make for tight end, it's either ruined by Travis Kelce or the sample size is lower, and it's ruined by Chigoziem Okonkwo. But he definitely stands out from all tight ends in terms of every rate stat that we've seen. Definitely some reason to be concerned looking at past Tennessee tight ends, but I also think he's more talented than any tight end Tennessee's had in these past couple seasons. So a chance he's going to be able to do that on a larger sample size, in which case he has that top 5 possibility where there's a ton of tight ends that are considered sleepers that I don't really see a strong path to them potentially being in the top 5, but he's one of the few that even above some of the tight ends we rank in the top 10, I don't see some of them getting to the top 5 range, where I think Okonkwo is one of the few that has the talent to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing, right? When you dive into his numbers and everything in his production, and you watch him, a lot of his plays last year, you start to fall in love with him pretty easily. So you don't want anybody else to take him. And I have the same guy as my top target here in round 11. I still like Okonkwo quite a bit, and I'm happy with him as my tight end too, and even happier that nobody else would have him. If by chance, he is gone, Greg Dulcich or somebody like that is someone I also like as a potential tight end too in this range. But yeah, this is one of my favorite bets here for him to get into the top 12 this season. So we don't have that many rounds left here. We could probably go through them a little quicker here, but round 12, as we kind of round out the rosters, what are you looking at in round 12?
Sure. I'll just combine round 12 and 13 for me. I'm going back-to-back running backs here. I found value at wide receiver early, and I think there's value at running back this late still. Devin Singletary and Jaylen Warren are the top 2 targets that I have here. Singletary going to Houston, where I think that offense can do better than they have in the past. Excited with what the changes that they've made, and Singletary is probably the best receiving option they have on running back on the team, and could cut into that early down work. He has experience as an every down runner, and with the new coaching staff, they just might like what they see out of Singletary more. So I'm willing to take a chance on them figuring out what they're doing at the running back position. And then Jaylen Warren, someone I'm excited by, great at avoiding tackles, one of my favorite sleeper running backs. We've talked about him before, has the chance to earn more carries on early down. So if I can get those kind of guys this late in the draft where I think they have a chance to be a starter, just simply by outplaying the other running back on the team, definitely those are the kind of guys that I'm happy to get this late in the draft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is a perfect kind of that range for those sleeper guys that we've talked about in recent episodes. And for me, it's, wide receiver or running back, either 1-1 or 2-2 here. But usually a running back almost always for me in this range. And, for wide receiver, if I'm looking at it, Nico Collins or Romeo Doubs, guys that we've already talked about as sleepers in other episodes. Preferred choice is Nico Collins here in the 12th round. I think there'll be some of the running back options that I also like available for me at my next pick to choose from, and that's where I usually would go. Like you said, Jaylen Warren. I also like Tank Bigsby quite a lot. Devin Achane, Kendre Miller. These kind of guys. I think for that I think could get touches this season. Achane and Bigsby kind of stand out to me as the kind of priorities in this range as the ones who could be more involved in their offenses, assuming their competition for touches is also healthy, but I think they'd have a bigger role even with the starters still in the offense there. So those are the guys that I kind of like in this range are the Devin Achane, Tank Bigsby, even Jaylen Warren and Kendre Miller, like you said as well. So and then the last four or five rounds or so, round 14 to 18, you talked about it in the article as well. It's filling depth, right? Are there any specific players that you like to grab here at the end of drafts, guys that usually go undrafted, or anything in most drafts that you just like to have, so that way you don't have to worry about putting in a waiver claim for them once the season gets going?
Kyle Phillips has been my classic last round pick. That I know they have DeAndre Hopkins now, but Phillips still, he's just a sleeper that I think we'll see plenty of targets out of the slot. They really liked him last year, and I think he'll still fill that role well. I also mentioned in the article with defense and kickers, some teams or some leagues force you to pick those players at those positions after you starting them at all in your league, but there are some leagues where you don't have to draft them, even though you have to start them week one. And in a lot of cases, I would much rather take another running back, see how they do in the preseason, or another rookie at a different position, just to see how they end up doing in the preseason. Because if they end up hitting well, then you want them on your roster. You'll end up cutting someone else for the kicker defense, versus just having a kicker that you're putting in your lineup anyway, that'll still be available for you anyway. So definitely rather take a chance on a skill player position than have a kicker defense, assuming you're planning on streaming defenses each week rather than just having a single defense or two single defenses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important, just in these last rounds, that don't really take a kicker until those last two rounds, if at all. Like you said, I know, defense, special teams especially can be tempting sometimes when you're looking at last year's results and things like that. But defense is just so unstable year over year. It's often not worth reaching for that position with so many options with similar potential kind of still being on the board, or like you said, if you're going to plan on streaming them week to week as well. So typically don't like to grab defense or special teams before the last two rounds. All right, that's it. I'll kind of run through our ideal rosters here just to kind of get, a recap of kind of what they look like here, if that makes sense. So, we talked about a lot of names, so it's just to kind of easier to kind of recap here by looking at what the rosters actually look like. So, Nate, with you went at quarterback, you got Josh Allen in the second round. Your RB1 is Christian McCaffrey, who you took in the first round. You have James Conner as your RB2 from the seventh round. Then at wide receiver in rounds 4, 5, and 6, you filled out that group with Terry McLaurin, Mike Williams, and Michael Pittman. You also had Mark Andrews as your tight end 1, who you got in the third round. Your flex spot is occupied by Gabe Davis for now. You got other good options in there as well: Zach Charbonnet, Rondell Moore, Chig Okonkwo, and Devin Singletary. And then as for me, my QB1 is Justin Fields, who I got in round 5. And then my RB1 is Tony Pollard, who I got in round 2, with Aaron Jones as my RB2, who I got in round 4. Justin Jefferson's my wide receiver 1. That was my first round pick. T. Higgins is my wide receiver 2 from the third round. And then Kadarius Toney is my wide receiver 3, who I got in the 8th round, followed by Dallas Goedert, who is my tight end 1. And then in my flex is Cam Akers, with Javonte Williams, Anthony Richardson, Chig Okonkwo, and Nico Collins all filling out the bench spots there. So how do you feel about that team? You feel pretty good?
Oh yeah, feeling good about it. I think I put it together as what I think ideally you can do. Obviously, like, one thing that's important is looking at ADP on wherever you're drafting, because ADP will change wherever you're drafting. That'll change who's available at each pick. So, like, if you're trying to do your draft based off this, as well as my rankings, definitely if someone has a higher ranking than a guy I'm suggesting at a pick, definitely get the guy with the higher ranking. I'm just trying to hedge as well as I can who's available at each pick. So obviously the perfect draft is if people are making bad decisions all around the draft so that people just fall to you. But perfect draft when people are picking typically where players are going. I'm happy with how this ends up.
Yeah, for sure. This is like our ideal way of how it's going to go, right? It's probably not going to be like that exactly, but it's still, I think, helpful to kind of have that thought process in place and have some targets in mind. But yeah, we used a consensus ADP as well to try to combine some of the ADPs to make it most realistic, anyways. But yeah, that'll do it for this one. Hopefully everyone found that helpful. And if you like the walkthrough for picks 1 to 3, we could definitely do another one using the other pick ranges as well if there's interest. But I know for me, it always helps to talk out my draft strategy a bit and get my thought process out there. I just to make me think about it a bit more and see if the rationale makes sense. So I feel ready to go for my drafts, even though, like we said, every draft is different and strategies often have to change on the fly. Never hurts to be prepared and lay out how you would ideally like things to go. So again, hopefully that was helpful for you guys to go through that exercise with us. And of course, if you want to have a written up version of this that you can read and with all the different picks, Nate wrote them all up on pff.com. So you can utilize those right now for your drafts as well. All right, it is time for another 5-round head-to-head draft between Nathan and I. Nate, my condolences on another loss. Somehow I won the board game draft, though it was much closer this time around. I moved to 4-1. I don't know how I did it, but the good news is it's a quick turnaround this week. You don't have to dwell on the loss too long. You could focus on getting back on the board this week. And you came up with a pretty interesting draft this week. Do you want to give the breakdown of what we're doing this time around? Because It's a fun idea.
I will mention the poll on the last one is still going. So I guess there's still a chance that I could catch up. But this draft, what we're going to do is we're going to draft NFL players like we're starting a new team. A lot of the time when you see people do these drafts, it's like based on the players' ages now when you're starting a brand new team. We're going to do it slightly differently in that you're drafting a team that doesn't get to play for another 7 years. So you're thinking of how good they're going to be in a couple years from now. So while you might be drafting Aaron Donald decently early on when you're doing this kind of draft, even though you might only be getting him for a year or two, if you get him for this draft, you're getting a 39-year-old version of him. I don't know exactly how old he is right now, but guessing around that age. So Aaron Donald, probably not the best choice for this kind of draft. So mostly focusing on the younger players that you would be starting a team around. And we'll keep with our tradition of only drafting 5 players. So we're just going to assume the other 17 players you have in your starting lineup will be around league average. So these star players aren't going to be playing with just replacements. I'll at least have decent players, so you don't have to have that kind of game theory of like, well, I'd need some bunch of offensive linemen in order to have any kind of offense. You'll at least have a bunch of average guys if you don't draft 5 offensive linemen.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and also we're sticking with people who are currently in the NFL just because John and I spend way too much of our time focusing on the NFL. So we do not spend enough time focusing on college football. So we want to talk about players that we at least are knowledgeable about so we can draft them well.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, you got the first overall pick, unless that poll drastically shifts in the next day or two. Who are you going with to start your roster here?
I will go with someone that I am pretty sure that you want based on our fantasy drafting. I will go with Justin Jefferson, number 1. With the 92.5 career grade, it's the second highest grade for any player that's 24 or younger right now. Creed Humphrey, the only player higher. And not going to pick a center with my first pick. I think wide receiver probably the second most important on the field. So definitely happy to get Jefferson as someone that I think has arguably the best start to a career by a wide receiver ever. So ideally he just continues on that path and is still great once he's 7 years older from now.
Yeah, that would have been my first pick as well. Yeah, I mean, he'll be 31. There's really not many people that aren't going to be in their 30s, whoever we're drafting here. So it makes sense that you'd go Justin Jefferson. So that does change things for me. I'm going to go with Micah Parsons, and I'm going to set him on my edge. He'll be 30 years old by the time this game is played. So not the worst age for an edge defender, especially one as good as Micah Parsons. I think he'd still be super effective, and hopefully whoever you pick at quarterback is gonna have fits with Parsons chasing after them.
Fair enough. He was number 2 on my list, highest graded defender at 24 or under right now. So I'm just going to go with the second highest graded defender that's 24 or under right now, and that's Sauce Gardner. I know cornerbacks right around that age is when they start to decline a little bit, but there's not a ton of options for elite cornerbacks that are that young, and just he's played so well this early in his career. I hope he's off to a great start to his career. Cornerbacks, greatly important position as well. So having someone that can shut down whoever you get at receiver is someone that I'm happy to have here.
Yep. That's a good one. I'm trying to think if I should go wide receiver here. Okay. All right. I am going to go with my second pick being, I'm stalling. I'm going Kyle Hamilton. Since you took DB, I'm going to also go DB. I'm going to take Kyle Hamilton. He was our highest graded safety last year as a rookie. He's only going to be 29, so he'll actually be under 30 by the time this game is played. But a versatile defender who I can line up all over the field and in the defense, and I think he would be just as effective there, hopefully, or more effective than a 30-year-old Sauce Gardner. That's the hope, anyways.
That's fair enough, but I am glad that you did not go wide receiver here, because the fourth player on my list was a wide receiver, Ja'Marr Chase, 87.3 career grade at this point, second highest offensive grade for anyone 23 or under at this point. I get to pair him back with Justin Jefferson, so having both of those as my top 2 wide receivers, I think will be a great benefit to my offense.
Yeah, that's brutal. That's brutal for me. All right, well, I mean, I guess I have to go wide receiver at this point. I can't let you add another one if that was your plan. So I'll go Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson will be 30 years old. So I really like Garrett Wilson's potential in the NFL to potentially come in and make his way into the mix as a top 5 wide receiver, especially with getting some better looks this year with Aaron Rodgers. Not that that'll matter in 7 years, but he's at least going to be my wide receiver 1 for this.
Fair enough. So as you've noticed, we have both avoided picking quarterbacks to this point. I think because we both know that there are multiple options of what we could go with that quarterback. And it's interesting in that how we're doing things with age. Some of the best quarterbacks will be a little bit older. There are also some intriguing options that are a little bit younger. But I'm going to hope with how long Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers were able to play at an elite MVP level that I'm going to give Patrick Mahomes with my next pick, and hope that he is continuing to win Super Bowls and MVPs at this point. He's not going to have Travis Kelce on this offense because Kelce would be in his 40s, but he will at least have Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase to throw to. So I hope that will make up for not having Kelce anymore.
Yeah, that's fair. I know. I thought about Mahomes too. I guess I worry about like the mobility maybe being an issue as he gets older too. He's got that high ankle sprain and ankle issues and things like that. That if anybody watched the Netflix quarterback series when it came out, there was a big focus. So I now have to hope that plays a part in our old age game here. But Mahomes is a good pick. I am going to add another wide receiver to round out my list here, and I'm going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown. So Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be my wide receiver too. Again, a guy, he's not going to be too old. He'll be 30 by the time this game was played. I really kind of focused on youth. I want guys as close to their prime as possible. So him and Garrett Wilson hopefully won't be too old, and hopefully can still be as effective as a slightly older Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase, but we'll see.
Fair enough. So this leaves me with one more player. I'm going to probably try to do what I think Twitter will want me to do, a little bit more than what I might end up doing. So I'm going to go with Kyle Pitts. 5th highest receiving grade over the first 2 seasons compared to any other tight end in the PFF era. The only ones higher, Rob Gronkowski, Jimmy Graham, Mark Andrews, and George Kittle. The only difference being Pitts is significantly younger than Graham and Andrews and Kittle were when they started their career. So Pitts is at a point where he's already accomplished more than most any other tight end at a point where other tight ends are just starting their career or might be a year away from starting their career. So I am very much still a believer that Pitts can do excellent things in this league with his age. I know he had injuries this past season, but I think he should be the best fantasy tight end over the past 10 years, the best tight end in real life for the next 10 years. And I think having a lot of great players on my offense will make up for only drafting one player on defense and mostly having an average defense.
Yeah. There's no pass rush on your team right now, so that's hopefully going to help my guy, who's not going to be as mobile. He's not really that mobile. Anyways, he's still got wheels. But my quarterback is going to be Joe Burrow. I have to add at least a quarterback in here, and I think Joe Burrow will be what'll he be 33. So again, like you said, these guys, these quarterbacks can play into their 30s easily, like Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers have shown. Joe Burrow doesn't really need the mobility. He's a really good pocket passer as well. And yeah, I'm just going to hope that 75% success rate against Patrick Mahomes continues into this point of his career.
Fair enough.
All right. So Nate
Burrow is the other guy that I had in case you took Mahomes from me, at least.
Nice. All right. So you got Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. You got Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson at wide receiver, Kyle Pitts at tight end, and Sauce Gardner as a corner. And for me, it is Joe Burrow at quarterback, Garrett Wilson and Amon-Ra St. Brown at wide receiver, Micah Parsons off the edge, and Kyle Hamilton at safety or defensive back. He's going to be very versatile in this for this team for me.
That's okay. Gardner's playing the entire defense for me.
Yeah. All right. So that'll be a good one. I'm pretty sure you got this one. I screwed it up, but that's okay. That'll do it for this one. Thank you again to everyone for listening. Thanks to Nate, as always, for doing this with me. We're in it now. We're it's full on fantasy season. So be sure to stay locked in to this podcast throughout fantasy draft season and checking PFF.com on the daily as we drop all sorts of fantasy related content and goodness for your reading and listening pleasure. Speaking of which, Nate, what do you have up on PFF.com this week?
This week I have standard rankings that went up today. Perfect draft strategy for anyone picking in a 10-team league. Also going back to the 12-team league by picks 7 through 9, 10 through 12 will be going out this week. Sleeper quarterbacks, wide receiver rankings will also be this week. 5 more player profiles, which started with DeAndre Hopkins today, and I'll be mostly focusing on tight ends this past week, as well as everything that I've written so far in the past couple weeks have been updated yesterday to account for the DeAndre Hopkins news. And I will also note that I will be out for the podcast on Thursday. You will be out next week. Ben Brown, who is one of our analysts more on the gambling side, but he will be over on this side talking fantasy. He's written a number of fantasy articles over his career at PFF as well. So happy to have him so we can go on one last vacation each before we really start to get into training camp and preseason and 20 plus weeks of football over the course of the regular season and preseason and playoffs.
Nice. Yeah. Looking forward to it. Yeah. Like Nate said, he'll be on a beach somewhere, maybe sipping strawberry daiquiris. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what the plan is, but no. Yeah. Nate will be off. Excited to get Ben Brown in here. Next week, we'll talk breakout wide receivers. So that'll be fun. And then I'll be off. Like Nate said, the week after for one episode, most definitely not on a beach somewhere, sadly. But so looking forward to those episodes. And if you haven't done so already, we'd love if you good folks could support the show and subscribe to the PFF Fantasy YouTube channel. It would mean a lot to us to help us get that new channel growing. And of course, the PFF Fantasy Discord is open to anyone and everyone who wants to talk all kinds of fantasy related topics. I know that one is really going to start ramping up as we get closer to the season, and throughout the season is a good way to kind of get your fantasy questions answered as well. So be sure to jump in there as well. Next episode, like I said, we'll be talking breakout wide receivers with Ben Brown, one of our brilliant data scientists here at PFF. So I'm sure he'll be bringing in some strong data and information to the table as well, making for a great episode. So hopefully you'll all continue to tune in for that one. And until next time, peace out.